November 17th, 2019, 3:47 a.m. Security cameras at the Golden Horseshoe Casino captured a figure in a faded gray hoodie walking through the casino floor with deliberate, almost meditative movements. He didn't glance at the slot machines screaming around him or acknowledge the drunken laughter echoing from the craps tables. His eyes were fixed on something else entirely, something nobody else could see. This was Ethan Cole, 22 years old, college dropout, living in a weekly motel on the wrong side of the strip. His bank account showed $11.42. The hoodie he wore was 3 years old, fraying at the cuffs, stained with coffee from a life lived on the margins. To every security guard, every pit boss, every surveillance specialist watching the cameras that night, he looked like just another broke kid gambling away his last 20 bucks before catching a Greyhound back to reality. But within 9 months, this same invisible ghost would legally extract $63 million from casinos across Nevada, and they still can't prove he cheated. Ethan Michael Cole was born in Sacramento, California in 1997. Middle-class family, public schools. Nothing remarkable. His teachers described him as bright but unfocused, the kind of student who could ace a test without studying or fail a class by never showing up. There was no in-between. One former high school teacher remembered him clearly. Ethan was frustrating. You'd give him a problem that stumped the whole class, and he'd solve it in 30 seconds while doodling in his notebook. But ask him to turn in homework? Forget it. He only engaged with things that fascinated him. Everything else didn't exist. In 2015, Ethan enrolled at Sacramento State University as a statistics major. For 6 months, he attended every lecture, took meticulous notes, and impressed his professors with his intuitive grasp of probability theory. Then he stopped showing up. His probability professor later recalled giving him an incomplete instead of an F because Ethan understood the material better than students who'd earned A's. He just stopped caring, the professor said, or maybe he cared too much about something else. I never knew which. What Ethan had discovered consumed him more than any degree ever could. The mathematics of human error. Most students learn probability as abstract theory, dice rolls, card draws, random number generators, clean, perfect mathematics. But Ethan saw something his professors didn't teach. He saw that real-world probability wasn't clean. It was messy, it drifted, it broke down at the edges where humans touched it. And nowhere did humans touch probability more than in Las Vegas. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. By 2017, Ethan had lost his financial aid and dropped out officially. He spent 2 years drifting through Sacramento, working weekend delivery shifts, sleeping on friends' couches, living on ramen and gas station coffee. But every night, while his roommates slept, Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor with his old statistics notebook spread around him like a paper fortress, filled with calculations that would have impressed his professors if they'd ever seen them. He was building something, a system, a way to see what casinos couldn't. A former roommate remembered those nights vividly. He'd be up at 3 in the morning, just writing, pages and pages of numbers and diagrams. I asked him once what he was working on. He looked at me like I'd interrupted him mid-surgery and just said, "I'm finding the holes." That was it. I'm finding the holes. The holes. That's what Ethan called them. Not flaws in the games themselves. Those were patched, monitored, bulletproof. No, Ethan was hunting something far more subtle. He was hunting the places where human behavior created tiny, exploitable drifts in probability. In August 2018, with $11.42 in his bank account and nowhere left to go, Ethan bought a one-way Greyhound ticket to Las Vegas. He couldn't afford the return trip. He didn't plan to need one. Fremont Street, Las Vegas. September 2018. Ethan Cole arrived in downtown Vegas with everything he owned in a backpack. One change of clothes, his notebooks, a calculator, and a certainty that bordered on madness, that he could beat the casinos not through luck, but through observation. He checked into the Starlight Motel, $43 a night, weekly rates available. The room smelled like cigarettes and defeat. The AC rattled. The bed sagged, but it had a desk, and that's all Ethan needed. For the first month, Ethan didn't gamble a single dollar. He watched. A casino security consultant who later reviewed the case explained, "Casinos spend billions on security, cameras, AI, facial recognition. They track every chip, every card, every spin. But you know what they don't track? Time. Not the way this kid did." Ethan's system, what he would later call the drift pattern, was built on a simple observation. Casinos are machines, but they're run by humans, and humans create patterns. He started with dealer rotations. Every casino rotates dealers to prevent fatigue and maintain alertness. Standard practice. But Ethan noticed something: dealers rotated on time, but their performance didn't reset instantly. A tired dealer just coming off an 8-hour shift would be replaced by a fresh one, but the replacement still took 5 to 7 minutes to reach peak performance. Their muscle memory wasn't fully calibrated. Their rhythm was off by milliseconds. Milliseconds that could be measured. He documented pit boss observation cycles. Pit bosses are trained to watch for card counters, cheaters, suspicious behavior. But they're human. They have routines. They scan in patterns, clockwise sweeps, predictable check-ins at the high-limit tables. And during shift changes, between 11 p.m. and midnight, there was always a 3 to 5 minute window where coverage overlapped chaotically. Chaos creates gaps. Gaps create opportunities. He studied automatic shufflers. These machines are supposed to be perfect, randomizing cards with computer precision. But they're mechanical, and mechanical things wear down. Ethan spent 40 hours watching one shuffler at the Golden Horseshoe. He noticed that during peak humidity hours, between 2 and 4 a.m., when desert temperatures dropped and moisture crept into the casino, the shuffler's motor would hesitate for a fraction of a second longer on certain cycles. That hesitation wasn't random. It was predictable. Most remarkably, he documented roulette wheels. Every wheel in Vegas is inspected, balanced, certified. But Ethan discovered that wheels behave differently based on ambient conditions, temperature fluctuations, table vibrations from nearby slot machines. Even the weight of chips stacked on the table rim created microscopic tilts that affected ball trajectory over thousands of spins. And every casino had a soft hour, a time when these variables aligned, when tired staff met mechanical, wear met environmental drift. For most casinos, that hour was between 3 and 5 a.m. Ethan filled 7 notebooks with data, dealer names, shift times, temperature readings, humidity levels, crowd densities. He created charts mapping the precise moment when each casino's operating rhythm drifted furthest from its baseline. And then he tested his theory. October 14th, 2018. Golden Horseshoe Casino. 3:51 a.m. Ethan sat at roulette table 7. He'd been sitting there for 6 hours betting $5 minimums, losing slowly, deliberately. To anyone watching, he looked like every other desperate gambler grinding away his rent money. His cheap digital watch, a $15 Casio he'd bought at a pawn shop, counted down the seconds. His notebook lay open in his lap beneath the table edge, filled with observations invisible to the cameras positioned above. He'd documented this exact table for 37 nights. He knew Patricia, the dealer, would arrive at 8 p.m. and remain until 4 a.m. An unusually long shift caused by staffing shortages the Golden Horseshoe had been experiencing for months. He knew that at hour 7, her right hand developed a barely perceptible tremor. Not from stress or fear, but from simple muscular fatigue. She'd spin the wheel with 0.3 seconds less force than optimal. Just enough to matter. He knew the wheel itself had been in operation for 18 months without a major recalibration. The heat from continuous operation caused microscopic expansion in the wood and metal. The ball landed in the third quadrant, numbers 11 through 17, with a frequency that exceeded statistical randomness by exactly 12.4% during hour 9 of continuous operation. He knew the pit boss, a middle-aged man named Gerald, completed his floor walk every 17 minutes with mechanical precision. And at 3:51 a.m., Gerald would be drawn to the craps tables where 3 bachelor party attendees would be celebrating a lucky streak loud enough to demand supervisory attention. Ethan had engineered nothing. He had simply observed everything. At 3:51 a.m., the universe aligned exactly as his notebooks predicted. Patricia's hand trembled as she released the ball. The wheel had been spinning for 8 hours and 53 minutes, deep into its drift window. Gerald turned toward the erupting cheers at the craps tables, his back to roulette table 7 for the first time in 90 minutes. Ethan placed his bets. Not one large bet that would draw attention. Not a foolish all-in moment that would look like desperation or luck. He spread his chips across numbers 11, 13, 14, 16, and 17, 5 separate bets. Together they covered the drift zone, but individually they appeared random, the scattered betting pattern of an amateur who didn't understand the game. The ball spun, clicked against the frets, began its descent, bounced once, twice, settled into number 14. Ethan had won $180 on a $5 bet. Patricia pushed his winnings across the felt without expression. Just another payout among thousands that night. He let the chips sit, waited for the next spin, bet the same pattern. Won again on number 11, then 13, then 17. Over the next 43 minutes, he won 17 of 22 spins. The losses were calculated, necessary. Winning every spin would have triggered immediate intervention. But 17 of 22 was within the realm of remarkable luck rather than impossible certainty. His initial $20 stake grew to $27,340. His heart rate never elevated above 68 beats per minute. His expression never changed. He didn't whoop or celebrate or pump his fist. He didn't thank the dealer or chat with neighboring players. He simply stacked his chips in neat towers, organized by color, and waited for Patricia to finish her current spin before quietly asking to color up. She exchanged his numerous small chips for 14 green $25 chips and a single black $100 chip. Ethan slid them into his hoodie pocket, nodded once to Patricia, and walked away from the table with the same measured pace he'd maintained for 6 hours. At the cashier cage, he presented the chips. The cashier, a young woman named Maria who was 3 weeks into her first casino job, processed the transaction without hesitation. Players cashed out $20,000 wins dozens of times every night in Vegas. Nothing unusual. She counted the cash twice, asked if he wanted a check instead, accepted his preference for cash, and handed him $273 bills wrapped in a paper band. Ethan folded the cash once and placed it in his front pocket. He signed the required tax form, his real name, his real social security number, everything legally documented, and walked out of the Golden Horseshoe Casino at 4:41 a.m. Security reviewed the footage the next morning during a routine scan. They saw nothing unusual, just another lucky kid who got out while he was ahead. The kind of win casinos see dozens of times every night. Patricia didn't remember him specifically. She dealt to 47 different players during her shift. Gerald had noted nothing suspicious in his log. The wheel had been inspected twice in the previous month and certified as balanced and fair. Except Ethan Cole wasn't lucky. He was precise, and he'd just proven his system worked. The $27,000 sat in his motel room, hidden in a hollowed-out dictionary he'd bought at a thrift store. He didn't celebrate, didn't buy anything expensive, didn't change his routine in any way. He ate the same dollar menu items from the same fast food restaurants. He wore the same clothes. He drove the same car. But in his notebook, he wrote a single line. Drift confirmed. System viable. Begin expansion. The ghost had just taken his first breath. Over the next 2 months, Ethan refined his system with obsessive precision. He visited 6 different casinos weekly, collecting over 240 hours of timing data. He learned how each building behaved at different temperatures, crowd densities, and dealer rotations. He discovered that almost every major casino had a soft hour between 3 and 5 a.m., when variables aligned in exploitable ways. He perfected a rotation that allowed him to exploit tiny probability drifts across 4 properties in one night, never staying at any single table long enough to draw attention. He didn't just beat the games. He beat the operating rhythm of Vegas itself. His approach was methodical to the point of invisibility. He drove a cheap used Toyota Corolla between casinos. He wore the same unremarkable clothes every night. He never bet more than he could statistically justify based on his measured drift advantages. He maintained perfect emotional control, No excitement when winning, no frustration when losing. To every surveillance system, every AI behavioral analysis program, every human observer, he looked like statistical noise. Just another face in the endless parade of gamblers. But he was winning. Consistently, legally, impossibly. By December 2018, he'd won at 19 different roulette wheels across 7 casinos. His total take, $460,000. He cashed out in small amounts to avoid currency transaction reports. He used prepaid debit cards. He converted winnings to gift cards and crypto. He left no single paper trail large enough to trigger automated alerts. He lived in the same weekly motel, eating the same cheap meals, wearing the same clothes. Nothing about his lifestyle changed. The money disappeared into offshore accounts and cryptocurrency wallets, untouchable and untraceable. To anyone watching him physically, he still looked like a broke college kid grinding out minimum bets. By January 2019, Ethan had expanded his operation into something that would have impressed military strategists. He documented drift patterns at 12 major casinos and 17 smaller properties across Las Vegas. He'd created detailed schedules showing optimal exploitation windows for each location. He knew which dealers got tired fastest, which pit bosses were most distracted, which roulette wheels showed the most significant environmental drift, which automatic shufflers had the most predictable mechanical wear. But more than that, he discovered something remarkable. The casinos had synchronized vulnerabilities. Vegas operates on a rhythm. The entire strip breathes together. Peak hours hit simultaneously. Shift changes cascade across properties at similar times. Security protocols mirror each other because casinos hire from the same pool of experts and follow the same gaming commission regulations. They'd built a monoculture of security that was individually strong but collectively predictable. Ethan had found the seams where that monoculture created exploitable patterns. He began running coordinated sweeps that were masterpieces of timing and execution. A typical night would begin at 2:30 a.m. at the Bellagio. He'd park his Corolla in the self-parking garage. Never valet, never anywhere, cameras tracked license plates with timestamp accuracy. He'd walk to the high-limit roulette room where a specific wheel designated B7 exhibited maximum drift between 2:30 and 2:47 a.m. 17 minutes. That was his window. The Bellagio's high-limit room required a $50 minimum bet, but the higher stakes didn't concern him. His advantage during the drift window was approximately 8.3%, more than enough to overcome the house edge of 5.26% with significant profit margin. He'd play exactly 17 minutes, betting in patterns designed to look like a wealthy gambler's whim rather than calculated exploitation. Sometimes he'd deliberately lose a few hands to maintain the illusion of randomness. He'd tip the dealer exactly 15% of his winnings, enough to be remembered as generous but not so much that they'd scrutinize his play. At 2:47 a.m., he'd color up and leave, not because he had to, but because his notebook said the drift window closed and continuing to play would reduce his edge below profitability. Discipline over greed, system over emotion, every single time. He'd walk through the casino, past the slot machines and poker tables and sports books, just another player in the endless stream. In the parking garage, he'd sit in his Corolla for exactly 8 minutes, reviewing his notes, calculating his winnings, preparing for the next location. Then he'd drive 12 minutes to the MGM Grand. The MGM Grand had a drift window from 3:15 to 3:34 a.m. on wheel M12 in their main casino floor. 19 minutes. Lower limits here, $10 minimums, but the drift percentage was higher, 9.1%. He'd play the same disciplined approach. Bet during the window. Leave when it closed. Tip appropriately. Remain invisible. From there, he'd drive to the Golden Horseshoe by 4:01 a.m. The motel where he lived was only 6 blocks away, but he never walked. Never created a pattern linking his residence to his operations. The Golden Horseshoe had a 23-minute window on table 7, the same table where he'd made his first successful run. Patricia no longer worked there. She'd transferred to day shift, but the wheel's mechanical characteristics remained predictable. 3 casinos, 3 separate drift windows, all in one night. Some nights he'd win $200,000. Some nights only $40,000. But it was always positive, always controlled, always leaving before anyone noticed. Each location saw him maybe twice a week, never more, never on the same days, never in a pattern suspicious enough to trigger alerts. He varied which casinos he hit and in what order. Sometimes he'd throw in completely random visits where he'd play badly and lose money deliberately, just to muddy his statistical signature. He maintained 3 different gambling personas, each with slightly different betting patterns and behaviors. At the Bellagio, he was the quiet high roller, calm, professional, barely speaking. At the MGM Grand, he was the friendly tourist, chatting with dealers, asking basic questions, acting like someone learning the game. At the Golden Horseshoe, he was the local grinder, tired, methodical, someone just trying to make rent money. None of these were fake in a way security could detect. He never wore disguises or changed his appearance. He simply adjusted his demeanor and betting style enough that security teams reviewing footage wouldn't immediately recognize him as the same player unless they were specifically looking for connections. The wins accumulated with terrifying consistency. 53,000 on a Tuesday night, 87,000 on Friday, 31,000 on Sunday, a deliberately smaller take because Sunday security was extra vigilant. Sometimes just 15,000 on a night when the drift was smaller than his models predicted, and he had the discipline to walk away early. But it was always positive, always controlled, always profitable. He developed elaborate cash management protocols. He'd cash out at the cage in amounts between $8,000 and $9,000, just below the $10,000 threshold that triggered mandatory currency transaction reports. If he'd won more, he'd take a cashier's check for the remainder, made out to shell companies he'd established through online incorporation services. The cash went to different banks in different cities. He'd drive to Henderson, North Las Vegas, Boulder City, anywhere within an hour, to deposit funds in amounts small enough to avoid attention. The cashier's checks got deposited to business accounts that existed only on paper. From there, the money flowed through a maze of transfers, cryptocurrency conversions, and international wires that would take forensic accountants years to untangle. By March, he'd won at 27 different roulette wheels across 15 properties. Total winnings, $4.7 million. His notebook contained 318 pages of data, every dealer's name, every shift schedule, every drift window, every environmental variable. It read like a doctoral thesis in applied probability, except it was handwritten in cramped letters, filled with abbreviations only he understood. He lived like a monk. The same $43 a night motel room, the same rotation of 3 t-shirts and 2 pairs of jeans bought at Walmart, the same dollar menu meals. His only indulgence was better coffee. He'd upgraded from gas station brew to actual coffee shop espresso because he needed the caffeine to maintain focus during 18-hour observation sessions. The money wasn't for spending, it was for freedom, for escape, for building a life somewhere far from Vegas where nobody knew him and nobody would look for him. He was accumulating enough to disappear completely and never have to worry about money again. By June, the total hit $16.3 million. He'd refined his system to near perfection. He could predict drift windows with 94% accuracy. He knew the exact moment to enter a casino, which wheel to play, how long to stay, and when to leave. He'd turned gambling into engineering, randomness into predictability, chaos into order. By September, he'd crossed $41 million. He'd won at 34 different wheels. He'd visited every major casino on the Strip and most of the locals' favorites. He'd played in Indian casinos outside Nevada just to test whether his system worked elsewhere. It did, though the windows were different and the profits smaller. He'd become the most successful advantage player in history, and nobody knew his name. The Corolla he drove had 214,000 miles on it. The hoodie he wore was developing holes at the elbows. His phone was a prepaid burner he replaced every 2 months. He had no social media presence, no online footprint, no connections to anyone in Vegas. He was a ghost in every sense of the word, present but invisible, real but intangible, and still he pushed forward. Not from greed, he had more money than he could spend in a lifetime, but from the same obsession that had driven him to fail out of college, to spend 2 years on friends' couches filling notebooks with calculations. He'd found a pattern in the chaos, a signal in the noise, and he wanted to see how far it could go. How much could one person take from an industry designed to be unbeatable? How long could perfect patience and discipline overcome infinite resources and surveillance? By November 2019, he had his answer. $63 million, 11 months, 34 different casinos, hundreds of drift windows exploited, not a single moment of cheating, not a single use of illegal devices or methods, just observation, mathematics, and a level of discipline that bordered on inhuman. He'd beaten Vegas, completely, legally, impossibly. And he'd done it alone, wearing a 3-year-old hoodie, driving a car held together by hope and cheap oil changes, living in a motel room that smelled like cigarettes and crushed dreams. The casinos had never seen him coming, and by the time they finally looked, he was already planning his exit. It started with a routine cross-property analysis in late October 2019. A data analyst at the Nevada Gaming Control Board was reviewing unusual winning patterns across multiple casinos. The analysis was looking for card-counting rings, chip counterfeiting operations, dealer collusion, the usual suspects. Instead, she found something impossible. There was a player, same physical description, same behavioral pattern, who appeared at 17 different casinos over 11 months. He played almost exclusively roulette. His win rate was statistically impossible, 68% over thousands of spins. Not high enough to trigger immediate alerts at any single property, but across the aggregate, utterly impossible unless he was somehow predicting outcomes. She flagged it. The Gaming Control Board elevated it. Within a week, 6 casinos were reviewing footage. They found him immediately. The gray hoodie, the same cheap backpack, the same calm, methodical walk, the same emotionless demeanor at every table. Security directors from competing casinos sat in the same room for the first time in years, watching footage of the same players systematically winning at their properties. "Who is this?" someone asked. Nobody knew. He'd never used a player's card, never provided ID except when cashing large checks, never stayed in casino hotels, never ate at casino restaurants. He existed only in the few hours he spent at their tables, and then vanished completely. They pulled every frame, thousands of hours of footage. They ran facial recognition. They tracked his car. They identified the Starlight Motel where he stayed. They began building a timeline of his movements, and slowly the scope of it became clear. This wasn't a card counter making a few $1,000s. This wasn't a cheating ring stealing chips. This was a systematic, calculated exploitation of something they couldn't identify, executed with perfect precision over 11 months, resulting in losses that exceeded $60 million. The casinos demanded a full Nevada Gaming Commission investigation. State gaming agents were assigned. They reviewed everything: the footage, the timing of his visits, his betting patterns, the dealers he played with, the specific wheels he chose. They brought in probability experts. They brought in mechanical engineers to inspect the wheels. They brought in behavioral psychologists to analyze his demeanor. They found nothing. The roulette wheels were perfectly balanced. The dealers hadn't colluded with him. Most didn't even remember him. There was no evidence of chip manipulation, card marking, electronic interference, or any traditional cheating method. His betting patterns, while consistently profitable, showed no evidence of outcome prediction that would indicate wheel bias or dealer signature exploitation. One investigator reviewed 60 hours of footage and finally said what everyone was thinking: he's not cheating. He's just there at the right time, every single time. But how? How could someone know the right time to play roulette? The game is supposed to be random, pure chance. The ball doesn't care about temperature or humidity or dealer fatigue, except Ethan had proven that it did. In ways too subtle for anyone else to measure, the game drifted from true randomness, and he'd learned to see those drifts. A former MIT mathematician brought in to consult on the case examined Ethan's winning patterns and came to a disturbing conclusion. If he's measuring environmental and human factors that create micro-biases in roulette outcomes, and if he's only betting during windows where those biases exceed the house edge, then technically he's not cheating. He's playing with an informational advantage gained through observation. That's not illegal. That's just understanding probability better than the casinos do. The casinos argued that exploiting their operational rhythms constituted fraud. The Gaming Commission disagreed. Observing public information and using it to make informed betting decisions wasn't a crime. Card counters do the same thing in blackjack. They're not cheating, they're just processing public information better than the casino expects. The distinction was crucial. Card counting is legal in Nevada. Advantage play based on observation is legal. The casinos can ban you, but they can't prosecute you. And Ethan Cole had never done anything that crossed the line into actual cheating. No devices, no marked cards, no Confederates, no hacking, no chip manipulation, just observation, timing, and a level of patience that bordered on superhuman. The investigation continued for 6 weeks. Agents interviewed dealers, reviewed maintenance logs, analyzed temperature and humidity data, and compared it against Ethan's betting times. What they found was remarkable. There was a correlation, not perfect, but statistically significant. Ethan had somehow identified that roulette wheels performed differently under certain environmental and operational conditions, and he'd timed his play to exploit those moments. It was brilliant, it was legal, and it was completely devastating to the casino's belief that their games were immune to this kind of advantage play. But by the time the investigation reached these conclusions, Ethan Cole had already disappeared. Ethan knew they were watching him before they knew they were watching him. It started with small things. A pit boss at the Bellagio who lingered 3 seconds too long near his table. A security guard at the MGM Grand who appeared in his peripheral vision twice in one night. Different locations. Same careful observation. The way a cashier hesitated before processing his payout, her eyes flicking up to a camera as if waiting for instruction. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but Ethan had spent 11 months studying the rhythm of Vegas, and now that rhythm had changed. The machine had detected an anomaly. It was beginning to focus. He'd always known this moment would come. The system was designed to catch patterns eventually. He'd simply hoped to stay ahead of it long enough to reach his target number. He'd crossed 60 million in early November. His internal deadline had been 65 million by Christmas. But the machine was accelerating its observation, and Ethan understood that greed was what destroyed advantage players. Knowing when to quit was itself an advantage. On November 23rd, he made his last play. The Venetian, 3:42 a.m., wheel V4, a 17-minute drift window. He won $41,000 with the same emotionless precision he'd maintained for 11 months. He tipped the dealer $2,000 in chips, far more than necessary, a goodbye gift to someone who'd never know what she'd been part of. He walked out of the Venetian at 4:04 a.m. and drove directly to his motel. Didn't stop for coffee, didn't make his usual observation rounds at other casinos. Just straight back to the Starlight, room 247. The escape plan had been prepared for months, updated weekly, rehearsed mentally 1,000 times. Now he executed it with the same systematic precision he'd applied to everything else. First, the money. He'd kept nothing in the motel room. Too risky. His cryptocurrency wallets existed only as seed phrases memorized through mnemonic techniques. 12 words for each of 7 wallets, 84 words total, all committed to memory and never written down. The offshore accounts were accessible through credentials stored in his mind. The shell companies existed only as digital entities with no physical paperwork. He'd kept exactly $37,000 in physical cash, hidden in 3 separate locations around Las Vegas. Not in banks, not in safety deposit boxes, in places nobody would think to look. Inside a specific book in a used bookstore, where he'd become friendly with the owner, behind a loose brick in a parking garage on the 3rd floor of a structure scheduled for demolition, and inside a sealed envelope taped to the underframe of a specific slot machine at a local's casino that he'd verified was rarely played. Over the next 6 hours, he collected all 3 caches. The bookstore first, arriving just after it opened at 10 a.m., purchasing the book containing his money along with 2 others to avoid suspicion. The parking garage at 11:30, waiting until no cars were nearby, retrieving the bundle in 43 seconds. The slot machine at 1:15 p.m., sitting down as if to play, reaching underneath during a moment when nearby cameras were focused elsewhere, extracting the envelope with practiced ease. By 2 p.m., he had everything that existed in physical form. $37,000 in cash. His notebooks, he'd never leave those behind. A single change of clothes, his laptop with its encrypted drives, the Casio watch. Nothing else. He returned to the motel at 3 p.m. and began the methodical process of erasing himself. Every surface in the room was wiped down with bleach solution. Every fiber that might contain his DNA was collected and burned in the motel's smoking area, disguised as someone burning old papers. His bed sheets, his towels, everything that had touched his skin went into the fire. He'd paid for the room in cash every week using a fake name, so there was no credit card trail, no real identification connected to this location. His Corolla, the car he'd driven for 11 months, faithful and invisible, had to be abandoned. It was registered in his real name, one of the few connections between his Vegas operation and his legal identity. He'd purchased it before fully understanding how deep he'd need to go into invisibility, and now it was a liability. He drove it to a long-term parking lot at McCarran Airport, wiped it completely clean, and left it in a corner space with the keys under the floor mat and the title in the glove box. He'd left a note: free car, needs work, first come, first served. Someone would take it within a week, drive it away, and muddy any tracking attempt with their own presence. From the airport, he took a taxi, paid cash, gave a fake destination, got out 6 blocks early, and walked the rest of the way to a used car dealership he'd scouted weeks earlier. He paid $9,000 cash for a 2004 Ford Taurus with 187,000 miles, registered it under one of his shell company names using a virtual address service, and drove away in a vehicle with no connection to Ethan Cole. The next phase required precision timing. He had to liquidate his remaining cashier's checks, still about $2 million in physical instruments, and convert them into untraceable assets before the casinos moved from observation to action. If they froze his accounts or flagged his identity with banks, he'd lose millions. He spent 4 hours driving to banks in different cities: Henderson, Boulder City, Laughlin. Each time depositing a cashier's check into a different shell company account, then immediately initiating cryptocurrency purchases through exchanges that didn't require extensive verification for business accounts. The money flowed from casino cashier's checks to bank accounts, to Bitcoin, to Monero, to cold storage wallets, and a cascade of transformations that would take forensic accountants years to trace, if they could trace it at all. By 11 p.m. on November 27th, every dollar was converted. Nothing remained in any form that could be seized or frozen. His wealth existed now as cryptographic keys, stored entirely in his memory and backed up on encrypted drives hidden in locations across the country that he'd never visited personally, sent via mail services and courier drops. He checked out of the Starlight Motel at 3:17 a.m. on November 28th. The desk clerk, a tired man named Raymond who'd seen Ethan come and go for 11 months, barely looked up. Ethan paid his final week in cash, said he was heading back to California to visit family, and walked to the Taurus parked 3 blocks away. He didn't drive to California. He drove east on I-15 through the pre-dawn darkness, while Vegas receded in his rearview mirror like a dream evaporating at sunrise. By 7 a.m., he was in Arizona. By noon, he'd reached a small town called Prescott, where he checked into a budget hotel and slept for 14 hours straight, the first real sleep he'd had in weeks. When he woke, he began phase 2 of the disappearance, the fragmentation. He drove the Taurus to Phoenix and sold it to a used car lot for $3,000. Took a taxi to the Greyhound station, bought a ticket to Albuquerque under a fake name. From Albuquerque, another ticket to Denver. From Denver to Omaha. From Omaha to Chicago. Each leg paid in cash, each creating a false trail that led nowhere. In Chicago, he bought new clothes from a thrift store, discarded his hoodie, the iconic gray hoodie that had appeared in thousands of hours of surveillance footage, in a dumpster behind a restaurant, got a haircut at a barber college where students worked for tips, bought clear lens glasses from a pharmacy to subtly alter his appearance. He looked different now, not dramatically, but enough. The hoodie had been such a defining part of his appearance in Vegas that without it, with shorter hair and glasses, he became just another face in the crowd. From Chicago, he took a train to Detroit. From Detroit, a bus to Toronto. He crossed into Canada using his legitimate passport. No reason not to, he hadn't committed any crimes, and disappeared into a city of 3 million people where nobody was looking for him. He rented an apartment using one of his shell companies, established a new identity, not fake but disconnected, his legal name, but attached to a history that had nothing to do with Vegas. As far as any paper trail showed, Ethan Cole had spent the last year working remote freelance jobs in technology, traveling occasionally, living a normal if unremarkable life. The notebooks, 318 pages of handwritten documentation representing 11 months of obsessive observation, were digitized, encrypted with military-grade cryptography, uploaded to distributed cloud storage across 7 countries, and then burned. One by one, in a fireplace in a rented cabin 2 hours north of Toronto, he fed his paper legacy to the flames and watched the smoke carry away the only physical evidence of his system. The ashes were scattered in a lake. The remaining fragments were crushed to powder and flushed down a toilet in a public restroom. Nothing remained that could connect the observations to the results, the method to the money. Back in Vegas, the Nevada Gaming Control Board began piecing together his identity on December 3rd. They ran facial recognition on thousands of hours of footage. They traced the license plate of his abandoned Corolla and found it in the airport parking lot. They interviewed Raymond at the Starlight Motel, who described a quiet kid who kept odd hours and never caused trouble. They found the room wiped clean, no usable evidence remaining. They issued a request to interview Ethan Cole regarding his gambling activities. Not an arrest warrant. He hadn't committed any crimes. Just a request. They wanted to understand his methods, to determine if laws had been broken in ways they hadn't detected. The request went to his last known address in Sacramento. His former roommate received it and forwarded it to an email address Ethan had left as an emergency contact. The email account was accessed once, from an IP address in Norway, that forensic analysis later determined was a VPN exit node. The response was brief. "I appreciate your interest in speaking with me. However, I decline to be interviewed at this time. I have not violated any laws. I use public information and personal observation to make informed betting decisions, which is my legal right. I wish you well in your investigation." That was the last communication anyone received from Ethan Cole. His family filed a missing persons report at the request of investigators, but withdrew it 3 weeks later after receiving a message, delivered through an encrypted email service that couldn't be traced, indicating he was safe and choosing to live privately. The message included enough personal information that only Ethan could have known that his family accepted it as genuine. The Nevada Gaming Commission closed its active investigation in January 2020. Final conclusion: no criminal activity detected. Recommended action: casinos should review operational security procedures and environmental controls that may create exploitable advantage play opportunities. Target status: unlocatable. Threat assessment: minimal. Subject unlikely to return to Nevada. Somewhere in the world, a 23-year-old with $63 million in untraceable cryptocurrency was building a new life. He'd never use his real name again in any professional capacity. Never return to the United States unless absolutely necessary. Never gamble in a casino again. He had no need to, and more importantly, no desire to. He'd proven what he set out to prove. The notebooks were gone. The system existed only in his memory, and memory, unlike paper or digital records, couldn't be subpoenaed or seized. He'd become a ghost in truth now, not just invisible within the machine, but vanished from the machine entirely. No longer a pattern to be detected, an anomaly to be investigated, a threat to be neutralized. Just a person who decided to walk away from a past life and start over somewhere. Nobody knew his name or his story. The only evidence he'd ever existed in Vegas were the flickering security camera images of a figure in a gray hoodie, walking with quiet purpose through casinos that never understood they were being systematically dismantled, one drift window at a time, by someone who'd learned to see what they'd spent billions ensuring remained invisible, and $63 million that would never be recovered, spread across cryptographic keys that might as well have been scattered across the cosmos for all the chance authorities had of retrieving them. Ethan Cole had beaten Vegas, and then he disappeared more completely than most people ever manage in a lifetime. Perfect execution, perfect escape, perfect ending. Casinos across Nevada implemented sweeping changes. They installed more sophisticated environmental controls to maintain constant temperature and humidity. They modified dealer rotation schedules to eliminate predictable patterns. They added new layers of surveillance specifically designed to detect extended observation periods. They upgraded automatic shufflers and recalibrated roulette wheels more frequently. But the changes were reactive. They were fixing problems they didn't know existed until Ethan Cole had already exploited them. Gaming Control Board internal memos, later leaked to the press, revealed the scope of the panic. One memo stated, "This represents a fundamental vulnerability in how we understand advantage play. If environmental and operational factors can create exploitable probability drifts, and if these drifts are small enough to escape individual casino notice, but large enough to be profitable over time, we may be facing a systemic issue across the industry." Another memo was more blunt. "We built our security to catch people cheating the games." Cole never cheated the games. He cheated the rhythm of our operations. That's exponentially harder to detect and prevent. Security conferences across the country featured presentations about the Ethan Cole problem. How do you stop someone who isn't breaking rules, just understanding them better than you do? How do you detect advantage play that requires months of observation to execute? How do you prevent someone from being patient? The answer, most experts agreed, was that you couldn't. Not entirely. The best you could do was make it harder, more time-consuming, less profitable. But if someone had Ethan's combination of mathematical ability, patience, and obsessive attention to detail, they could probably still find edges. Some security directors admitted privately that they now watch for players who sat for hours betting minimums, players who took notes, players who seemed to be timing something rather than just gambling. But even then, how do you distinguish between someone studying the game and someone just passing time? How do you ban someone for being observant? You can't. Not legally.